The street was crowded, filled with people who were rushing from one place to another. Their eyes were mostly down, glued to their phones, or focused on the path ahead. No one looked around to notice the small things happening along the sidewalks. Among the crowd, there was a young girl sitting on the edge of the street near a public piano. Her clothes were worn, faded, and patched in several places. Her hair was messy, and her shoes had holes. She held a small cup in her hand, hoping that someone would notice her and toss a coin. Most people, however, did not even glance at her. To them, she was just another part of the street scenery. The girl did not speak to anyone. She didn't ask for much, only a little help so she could eat something for the day. She had learned long ago that words alone would not make people care. Many had walked past her without a second thought. Some would look at her and shake their heads, whispering to their friends, while others would laugh quietly, thinking it was amusing to see someone in such a condition. Despite all of this, the girl remained calm. There was a quiet strength in her eyes, a determination that no one seemed to notice. Beside her, the public piano stood, slightly chipped and dusty, yet still functional. It was an unusual sight in such a busy area, a strange oasis in the middle of noise and movement. The girl had noticed the piano days ago. It seemed to call to her, offering a place where she could escape the harshness of the streets, even for just a few moments. Today she decided she would sit at it, not because she expected anything, but because it gave her a sense of purpose. She moved slowly, adjusting her thin jacket against the cold wind, and took a seat on the small bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant at first around her. People continued to walk past. Some slowed down when they saw her at the piano, but most kept their pace. A few smirked or whispered comments, imagining that she would play poorly, making a fool of herself. Some even laughed outright, nudging each other, daring the other to see what she might do. The girl heard these sounds but did not let them disturb her. She had faced worse. She had grown used to the cruel judgment of strangers. She took a deep breath and let her hands fall gently on the keys. The first few notes were quiet, almost shy, as if testing the waters. The sound was soft but clear. People nearby paused, unsure of what they were hearing. Some glanced back, curious. Others shook their heads and turned away, convinced that it would only get worse. The girl's eyes were closed as she continued to play. Her mind focused entirely on the music, allowing it to flow from her fingers. Slowly, the notes became more confident. There was a rhythm, a story in the melody, something that spoke of her life, her struggles, and her dreams. The crowd started to notice. People who had passed without a glance began to slow their steps, their curiosity piqued. Some stopped entirely, unsure why they were drawn to the music. Even those who had been laughing a moment ago now looked on with surprise. The melody was not chaotic or clumsy. It was beautiful, haunting even. It seemed impossible that someone so young, sitting on the street with nothing, could play with such depth. A few coins were tossed into her cup, landing with soft clinks. The girl did not look at them. Her focus remained on the piano, on the story her fingers were telling. She played with emotion, her movements gentle but precise, each note deliberate, carrying a piece of her life with it. The people around her could feel it. The laughter, the whispers, the judgment, all of it faded as the music took over the street for just a few moments. There was silence in the crowd, not the silence of emptiness, but a silence filled with attention, awe, and disbelief. A passerby, who had initially laughed, stood still, his eyes wide. He had never expected something so powerful to come from someone in such a situation. Others joined him, forming a small circle around the girl. Their phones, which had been glued to their hands, were now forgotten. Some were holding them up to record, unable to believe what they were seeing. The girl played as if she were alone, unaware of the growing audience. She was not playing for fame or recognition. She was playing because she had to. Because the music was a part of her that could not be ignored, as she continued. A woman in the crowd wiped tears from her eyes. She could not explain why she was crying. The melody was so full of feeling, so honest, that it touched a place deep inside her. Others in the crowd felt the same. Faces that had been harsh, skeptical, or indifferent now showed emotion. Respect and admiration replaced judgment. The girl's hands moved swiftly, dancing over the keys, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to tell stories without words. The music spoke of hardship, but also of hope, of resilience, of a heart that refused to be broken despite the odds. Even the street itself seemed to change. The honking cars, the chatter, the hurried footsteps all faded into the background. The girl had created a moment in time, a bubble where only music and feeling existed. People began to understand that they had been wrong to judge her by her appearance. They realized that she was not just a homeless girl. She was an artist, a storyteller, a person whose soul could reach them without a single spoken word. Coins continued to drop into her cup, now accompanied by small notes and scraps of paper with kind messages. Some simply stood there, silent, moved by the courage it took for her to play in the face of ridicule. For the girl, the world seemed to shrink to the piano and the music. Each note carried a piece of her soul, a fragment of her story. She had faced hunger, cold nights, loneliness, and the harsh judgment of society. Yet here, in this moment, she was free. The piano was her refuge, her voice, her way of saying that she mattered, that her existence had value beyond what anyone could see. The people around her felt it too, and for the first time that day, the crowd experienced a moment of shared humanity. They were no longer strangers passing each other by. They were witnesses to something extraordinary. The girl's playing grew softer, slowing to a gentle end. She lifted her hands, letting the final notes linger in the air like a delicate echo. The street seemed to hold its breath for a moment, as if not wanting to disturb the magic that had just occurred. And then a soft murmur of awe ran through the crowd. It was quiet, respectful, filled with a new understanding. People looked at her not as someone to laugh at, but as someone to admire. They had been proven wrong, and they knew it. Though she had not sought attention, she had earned it. And as the crowd slowly began to move on, some leaving with thoughtful expressions, others with smiles and nods of respect, the girl sat for a moment, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. The music had given her a voice, a presence, a way to touch people without words. And even though she would return to the reality of the streets after this, she knew that in this moment, she had changed something not just for herself, but for everyone who had been there to hear her play. She had reminded them of something important, that talent, heart, and humanity cannot be judged by appearances, and that sometimes the most unexpected places hold the greatest beauty. The day moved on, and the crowd around the piano slowly began to thin, but the music lingered in the minds of those who had paused to listen. Some continued on their busy paths, glancing back over their shoulders, unable to forget the sound they had just heard. The girl remained at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, as if she were waiting for something to inspire her next song. There was a quiet patience in her posture, a calmness that came from being alone in the streets for so long, and yet having a world inside her that no one could take away. A few people lingered longer, unsure whether to leave or stay. They watched silently, not wanting to disturb the delicate atmosphere the girl had created. She noticed them, but she did not stop playing. Her eyes were closed, and her fingers began to move again, this time with a slower, more thoughtful rhythm. The music was softer, reflective, almost like a conversation with herself. It was a melody that spoke of loneliness and longing, but also of hope and resilience. Even without words, it told a story that everyone could understand. A young man, who had been laughing at the beginning, now stood frozen. He could not believe what he was hearing. The talent in front of him was undeniable. He had expected clumsy notes, something amusing at most. Instead, he heard a depth of emotion that made him pause and reconsider everything he thought he knew about this girl. He glanced around and noticed that other people were feeling the same. The laughter, the mocking whispers, had completely disappeared, replaced by admiration and respect. Some faces even showed tears, as if the music had reached a place deep inside them. Touching something they did not even realize they had, the girl's hands moved with confidence now. Each note deliberate, each chord filled with feeling. She played songs she had memorized from her childhood, fragments of music she had heard long ago in places she could not reach anymore. The melodies carried memories happy and sad, moments of joy and moments of loss. She did not play to impress anyone. She did not care about the crowd or the coins that occasionally dropped into her cup. She played because it was a part of her, a way to express what words could not. A few older women, passing by with their shopping bags, stopped to watch. One of them whispered to her friend, saying how remarkable it was that someone with so little could have such talent. Another shook her head in disbelief, feeling ashamed that Shahad ever judged the girl based on her appearance. The girl's music had a way of stripping away the assumptions people carried with them. In that moment, everyone who listened became a little more aware of the humanity in the world around them. Children, curious and unafraid, approached the piano cautiously. They had heard the notes as they played nearby and felt drawn to the sound. Some of them mimicked the hand movements, pressing imaginary keys, while others simply sat on the ground, mesmerized. Their laughter mingled softly with the music, creating a gentle harmony that added to the beauty of the moment. The girl smiled faintly, feeling a quiet joy that she had not experienced in a long time. She noticed the wonder in the children's eyes and allowed herself to imagine that there was still kindness and curiosity in the world. Even amidst its harshness, the street had changed, even if only for a little while. The people who had paused to listen were no longer thinking about their errands or their busy lives. They were caught in the spell of the music, drawn into a world created by a girl who had been ignored and dismissed. Every note she played seemed to carry a message that appearances could be deceiving. That strength often lived where it was least expected, and that beauty could be found even in the most overlooked places. An elderly man, leaning on his cane, stood near the piano with tears in his eyes. He had lost a daughter years ago and recognized something in the girl's music that reminded him of her. He felt a pang of regret for having passed by her at first, for having assumed she had nothing to offer. The girl's playing reached him in a way that words could never have done. He wiped his eyes discreetly and smiled through his tears, understanding that the girl's music was a gift that transcended her circumstances. A young woman, carrying a backpack and clearly on her way to work, had been watching from the edge of the crowd. She was hesitant at first, unsure if she should stay or continue on her path. But as the music washed over her, she found herself rooted to the spot. Her phone had been forgotten, her worries temporarily lifted. The girl's fingers moved effortlessly over the keys, and the young woman felt emotion she had long buried resurface. She realized that she had underestimated the world, assuming it would always be ordinary and predictable. In front of her was proof that extraordinary things could happen anywhere, even on the street, and from someone who seemed to have nothing. The girl continued to play, shifting between melodies that were gentle and melodies that were powerful. She alternated between moments of introspection and bursts of energy, keeping the audience captivated. People who had been skeptical now leaned closer, eager to hear what would come next. Even the harsh city sounds seemed to fade into the background, as if the music had the power to make time stand still. For a few precious minutes, the busy street was transformed into a place of wonder, connection, and shared humanity. Coins kept falling into her cup, now joined by small notes with kind words written on scraps of paper. One note read, "Thank you for reminding me that there is beauty in the world." Another said, "Your music touched my heart." The girl looked at the notes briefly and tucked them into her coat. She did not play for recognition or gratitude, but a quiet sense of warmth spread through her chest. These small gestures of kindness reminded her that there were still people who could see beyond the surface, who could understand the value of someone simply because of their talent and their spirit. The crowd began to grow, drawn by the sound of the piano and the story unfolding before them. Strangers exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the miracle they were witnessing. Some spoke softly, marveling at how a girl in her situation could create such music. Others remained silent, captivated and unwilling to break the spell. The girl's focus never wavered. She played with precision and feeling, aware of every note, every pause, every nuance. She had transformed a simple street corner into a stage, and in doing so, it transformed the people around her. People who had laughed at her earlier were now ashamed. They realized how wrong they had been to judge her. The girl had shown them that talent, heart, and courage were not dependent on wealth appearance, or social status. She had reminded them that every person has a story, and that some stories are so powerful they can move an entire crowd without a single word. The transformation in the audience was subtle but profound. Laughter and ridicule had been replaced with respect, admiration, and a newfound awareness of human dignity as the sun began to set. Casting long shadows across the street, the girl's music shifted again, slowing into a more reflective, tender melody. It was a song of gratitude, of longing, and of quiet hope. People felt it deeply, sensing the life experiences behind each note. They understood that she had faced hardship and pain, yet here she was, sharing her gift freely, touching the hearts of strangers. The music had become a bridge between her world and theirs, connecting them in ways that words never could. By the time she finished playing, a sense of reverence hung in the air. The crowd clapped softly, many wiping tears from their eyes, others simply smiling in wonder. The girl stood slowly, gathering her belongings, and for the first time, looked around at the people who had been drawn to her music. Their eyes were no longer full of judgment or mockery. They were full of respect and appreciation. She nodded slightly, a small gesture of acknowledgement, and then walked away, leaving the piano and the street forever changed by her presence. The following day, the girl returned to the same street corner where the piano stood. The morning air was crisp, and the city was waking up with its usual rush and chaos. But she did not notice the noise, the honking cars, or the hurried people walking by. Her mind was already focused on the piano, the familiar weight of her fingers against the keys, and the melodies waiting to be shared. She settled on the bench, placing her worn hands lightly on the piano, feeling the cool surface under her palms. The streets were not empty, but something had changed. Word had spread from the previous day, carried by people who had witnessed her playing. Some who had been skeptical were now curious, and a few who had laughed before were eager to see her again. They remembered the music that had taken them by surprise, and they wondered if the girl could do it again. There was an air of anticipation, a quiet energy that seemed to pulse around the piano even before the first notes were played, as she began to play. The music was gentle at first, as if testing the crowd once more. The notes floated in the air, clear and precise, carrying a sense of calm over the street. People slowed down, some stopping completely, drawn to the sound. Children pressed their faces to the piano's edge, fascinated by the movement of her hands. Adults looked on their faces a mix of surprise and admiration. Even those who had been indifferent before now felt the magnetic pull of her music. The piano had become a gathering place, center of attention where strangers could come together and experience something beautiful. A few coins dropped into her cup, but the girl ignored them, lost in the flow of her playing. Each note seemed to tell a story, reflecting not just skill but emotion. The melodies spoke of struggle, hope, sadness, and joy all at once. People could sense that she had lived through hardships. Her music was born from real experiences, not just practice or talent. There was an authenticity in her playing that made it impossible to turn away from. A middle-aged man, who had walked by several times without paying attention, stopped in his tracks. He watched as her fingers danced across the keys, producing sounds that seemed far beyond what anyone would expect from someone living on the streets. His eyes widened, and a faint smile appeared as he realized how wrong he had been to judge her. Nearby, a young woman clutched her bag, tears forming in her eyes as the music resonated with memories of her own struggles. It was as if the piano had the power to reach directly into their hearts, bypassing skepticism and touching something deep and personal. The girl continued, her movements fluid and natural. She had a way of expressing herself through the piano that went beyond notes and rhythm. It was as if the instrument had become an extension of her thoughts and feelings. The crowd had grown, now consisting of people from all walks of life: students, office workers, shopkeepers, and even street vendors. They were united by the music, temporarily forgetting their differences and their routines. For a brief moment, the street became a place of connection, understanding, and shared humanity. A young boy approached cautiously, holding his mother's hand. He looked at the girl with curiosity and a hint of awe. She smiled gently at him, continuing to play without missing a beat. The boy's eyes widened as he listened, and he began to mimic the movements on an imaginary piano. Laughter escaped him, light and innocent, adding a subtle layer of joy to the scene. The girl's music had the power to not only move adults, but also to inspire the imagination of children, showing them that beauty and talent could be found in the most unexpected places. The melodies began to shift, becoming more complex and layered. Each chord seemed to carry weight, each transition reflecting thoughtfulness and experience. People in the crowd leaned in, captivated by the unexpected depth of her performance. Conversations had stopped entirely. All that existed was the girl, the piano, and the music flowing between them. Even the sounds of the city faded into the background, replaced by the harmony that filled the air. It was a rare moment of stillness and attention, a break from the constant rush and noise of urban life. An elderly woman, leaning on a cane, watched with tears in her eyes. She had seen many things in her long life, but the girl's talent and presence struck her deeply. The woman could feel the emotion in the music, understanding that it came from a place of lived experience. She thought about her own regrets and the times she had judged people too quickly. This girl, who had so little in terms of material possessions, possessed something far greater, an ability to touch hearts without speaking a word. The girl's playing grew more passionate, the tempo quickening slightly as she poured more of herself into the music. The crowd felt the change instantly, some moving closer to hear better, others closing their eyes to fully immerse themselves in the sound. The energy around the piano intensified, a mix of admiration, respect, and wonder. People were no longer thinking about anything else. They were completely present, caught in a moment that felt suspended in time. Every person who had initially doubted her ability now understood that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Coins and bills continued to find their way into her cup, along with small notes of encouragement and gratitude. Some people approached quietly, leaving kind messages without expecting recognition. The girl noticed these gestures with a small nod or a brief smile, but she remained focused on the music. She did not need validation. Her satisfaction came from creating something real and powerful, from expressing herself in a way that words could never fully capture. The melodies became more varied, weaving between soft, tender passages and strong, forceful chords. It was a journey through emotion and memory, reflecting the girl's life experiences and the resilience she had cultivated. People could feel the stories behind each note, sensing the hardships she had faced and the hope she carried within her. The music had become a language that transcended social boundaries, connecting everyone who listened on a human level. A man with a camera, who had initially come to take a quick photo out of curiosity, found himself rooted to the spot. He lowered the camera and simply watched, unable to capture the essence of what he was witnessing through a lens. The music spoke too loudly, too clearly for any device to contain. He realized that some moments were meant to be experienced fully, without trying to preserve them or share them. The girl's playing had reminded him of the importance of presence, of truly noticing the world around him as the sun rose higher. Casting warm light across the street, the girl's music shifted again, moving into a slower, more reflective passage. Her fingers moved with gentle precision, coaxing out a melody that spoke of longing and quiet determination. The crowd responded with hushed whispers of appreciation, some letting their emotions show openly, others simply standing silently, absorbing every note. Even those who had been skeptical or dismissive before now watched with open hearts. Recognizing the depth and sincerity of her talent, children clung to their parents, listening intently, inspired by the magic unfolding before them. Adults exchanged looks, sharing a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected beauty that had entered their day. The girl's music created a temporary sanctuary, a place where judgment and indifference could not enter. It reminded everyone present that moments of grace could happen anywhere, even on a busy street corner, and that people often held more within them than the world could see at first glance. When the final notes hung in the air, the girl lifted her hands slowly, letting the silence settle over the street. There was a pause, a collective intake of breath, as the crowd absorbed the full impact of the performance. Then, softly at first, and gradually growing, applause began to ripple through the onlookers. It was gentle, respectful, and filled with genuine admiration. The girl smiled faintly, acknowledging the recognition without letting it distract her from the quiet satisfaction she felt inside as she stood and gathered her belongings. The people around her could not stop talking quietly amongst themselves, sharing their astonishment and gratitude. She had transformed the street corner into a place of art and humanity, touching the lives of everyone who had stopped to listen. The memory of her playing would linger in their minds long after they returned to their daily routines, a reminder that talent and beauty could be found in the most unexpected places, and that every person had the potential to leave a mark on the world, no matter their circumstances. The next morning, the girl returned to the street with the same quiet determination she had shown the day before. The public piano, though worn and slightly chipped, seemed to welcome her, as if it knew she would bring it life once more. She settled onto the bench, her hands resting lightly on the keys, and took a deep breath. The air was crisp and carried the smells of fresh bread from a nearby bakery mixed with the exhaust from passing cars. She ignored the distractions. Focusing solely on the music she wanted to create, word had spread even further about the girl and her piano. People who had never passed through this part of the city were now curious. Some had come specifically to see her play. Others stumbled upon the scene by chance and were immediately drawn in by the familiar, haunting melodies floating in the air. Her audience today was larger, more diverse, and more attentive. Office workers on their way to early meetings paused to listen. Shopkeepers leaned against their doorframes, and passers-by lingered longer than they normally would. The street, for a few precious hours, was transformed into a shared space of music and attention. The girl began to play softly, her fingers caressing the keys with care. The music rose gently, weaving in and out of quiet moments in louder, more confident chords. She had learned to play this way over many years, practicing not for fame or applause, but because the piano was the voice that allowed her to express herself when words failed. People were captivated. The skeptics from previous days were now completely absorbed, unable to tear their eyes or their minds away from her performance. There was a reverence in the air, collective recognition of something extraordinary unfolding before them. Coins clinked into her cup occasionally, but she did not pay them much attention. Her music was not for money, nor did she seek recognition. Each note she played carried a story, a fragment of her life that she shared freely. The melodies were filled with a depth of emotion that reached directly into the hearts of her listeners. Even those who had doubted her before now looked on with respect, realizing that they had underestimated not only her talent, but her courage. A small group of children gathered nearby. Enchanted by the movement of her hands and the sound of the piano, they whispered to each other, pointing at her fingers as they danced across the keys. One little girl, holding her mother's hand, asked if she could try playing the piano too. The mother nodded, and the girl gently touched the keys, making soft, tentative sounds. The homeless girl smiled softly at the interaction, recognizing the innocence and curiosity of children. It reminded her of simpler times, moments before life had become so harsh, and she allowed herself a fleeting sense of joy. The music grew richer, more layered as she played. Passers-by, who had stopped to listen, were now completely entranced. They noticed details they might have missed before: the subtle movements of her fingers, the expression on her face as she connected with each note, the intensity in her eyes. The piano had become a medium through which she communicated directly with the world. For a moment, the street, usually noisy and chaotic, became a sanctuary. There was no traffic, no honking, no rush, only the music and the human connection it fostered. An elderly man with a weathered face leaned heavily on his cane as he watched her play. He had lived many years, seen countless performances, but something about this girl's music struck him differently. It was raw, real, and filled with a sense of life's fragility and beauty at once. He wiped a tear discreetly and nodded to himself, silently acknowledging the truth that talent and spirit often reside where least expected. People around him felt the same. There was a shared recognition that they were witnessing something rare, a gift that transcended circumstance. As the girl's hands moved across the piano, she shifted into a more powerful melody. The tempo quickened and the music surged with emotion, almost like a story being told without words. People instinctively leaned closer, some even closing their eyes to absorb the full depth of the sound. The energy around the piano intensified, a collective pulse of admiration, respect, and awe. Even those who had initially judged her harshly could not ignore the power she was displaying. The music demanded attention, respect, and reflection. A young couple, who had been walking hand in hand, paused to listen. They were silent at first, then exchanged glances filled with astonishment and appreciation. The girl's playing had stirred something within them, reminding them of moments in their own lives when beauty had appeared unexpectedly. Moments that had changed their perspective or brightened their darkest days. They realized that they had been too quick to assume, too eager to judge, now felt humbled by the experience. The melodies shifted again, becoming soft and introspective. She played with delicate precision, letting each note linger in the air bore, moving on. People around her felt a quietness descend upon the street. Conversations had ceased, phones were lowered, and eyes were focused entirely on her. In that moment, she was not just a homeless girl playing on a public piano. She was a storyteller, a guide, a messenger of something intangible but deeply felt. The music had broken barriers, erased skepticism, replaced it with genuine admiration. Small gestures of kindness began to appear in the crowd. Notes of encouragement, written on scraps of paper, were discreetly left near the piano. Coins turned into bills, and some people offered food and water without hesitation. The girl noticed these gestures and smiled faintly, acknowledging the humanity she saw in the crowd. It was a quiet exchange, unspoken but deeply understood. She realized that music could create a space where people could connect beyond superficial differences, where empathy and respect replaced judgment and indifference. As she continued playing, the crowd grew even larger. Passersby who had only intended to walk through paused, captivated by the unfolding performance. People who had doubted her abilities now looked on in amazement, unable to deny the extraordinary talent before them. Some whispered to each other, expressing disbelief and admiration. The girl's focus never wavered. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but for the pure expression of herself. The music was an extension of her being, and in sharing it, she shared a piece of her life with everyone who listened. A man who had initially been skeptical leaned closer, tears forming in his eyes. He had come to the street with a sense of judgment, convinced that the girl could not possibly be skilled. Now he understood how wrong he had been. He felt a mix of shame and awe, realizing that life often surprises us with hidden talents and unexpected beauty. Around him, others felt the same, their faces reflecting a shared recognition that they had been mistaken, and that something remarkable had been revealed to them. The girl's music continued to evolve, moving through a range of emotions and styles. Each shift in tempo and melody seemed intentional, deliberate, and deeply felt. She played not just to showcase skill, but to convey a story, a life lived with challenges, resilience, and hope. The audience, though silent, understood the narrative woven into each note. Their hearts and minds were engaged, connected by a common experience that transcended their differences. By midday, the street had been transformed into a space of reflection and admiration. People who had been strangers moments ago now shared a connection through the music. They nodded to each other, whispered comments of appreciation, and occasionally smiled in quiet awe. The girl had created something extraordinary, a bridge between herself and the world. A reminder that talent and humanity could exist in places often overlooked, as the final notes hung in the air. The girl lifted her hands slowly, letting the silence settle over the crowd. Applause began, soft at first, and then growing steadily, filled with genuine respect and admiration. She smiled faintly, acknowledging the recognition without letting it distract her from the quiet satisfaction she felt inside. She had not only shared her music, but also reminded the world that every person, regardless of their circumstances, held something valuable within them. For the crowd, it was a lesson in humility, empathy, and the unexpected power of human talent. The morning sun poured over the city's streets, casting a warm, golden glow over the familiar corner where the piano stood. The girl approached slowly, her worn shoes tapping lightly on the pavement. Carrying only the few belongings she had managed to gather, she paused for a moment to look at the piano, noticing the scratches and faded paint from years of use. Yet it remained steadfast, waiting silently to be awakened once more. Today she felt a mixture of anticipation and calm determination. She knew that her music had the power to reach people, and she hoped it would touch hearts in ways words never could. The street was busier than usual, with people rushing to their destinations, talking on phones, and carrying bags of groceries or briefcases. Some glanced at the girl as she settled onto the bench, but most kept moving. However, there were those who had come back after hearing about her previous performances. Their curiosity and anticipation were palpable. They slowed their steps, waiting for the first notes to rise above the city noise. Even those who had doubted her skill before lingered nearby, unsure if they could really believe what they had heard. She placed her hands gently on the keys and began to play. The first notes were soft, almost shy, as if greeting the world cautiously. But soon the music gained confidence, flowing freely with a grace that captivated everyone nearby. The melody was familiar yet new, a combination of tenderness and strength. People stopped to listen, their conversations fading into the background. The girl's music had a magnetic pull, drawing in not just passersby, but also those who had never planned to stop at this street corner. They were compelled to witness something extraordinary unfolding before them. The crowd slowly grew, forming a semicircle around the piano. Adults, teenagers, and children alike stood silently, mesmerized by the talent in front of them. Some held their hands over their mouths in awe. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them completely. There were no phones recording this time, no distraction from the performance. Everyone wanted to feel the music fully, to be present in the moment that the girl created with her talent. Her fingers danced across the keys, telling a story of resilience, hope, courage without a single word. Coins dropped into her cup from time to time, but the girl paid little attention. Her focus was entirely on the music. Each note carried emotion, each chord resonated with the struggles she had faced and the hope she clung to. The melodies moved from soft and delicate to powerful and commanding, capturing the full spectrum of human feeling. The people around her could sense the sincerity in every movement, the authenticity of someone who had lived through hardship and yet had found a way to create beauty from it. A middle-aged woman, who had been walking by with a bag of groceries, stopped in her tracks. She could not believe the sound she was hearing. The girl's playing had a clarity and depth that seemed impossible for someone so young and so overlooked. She looked around at the crowd, realizing that everyone else was equally captivated. The woman felt a sense of shame for the assumptions she had made about the girl based on her appearance. She understood in that instant that true talent often hides in places that the world ignores. The music grew more intricate, with layers of harmony that revealed the girl's deep understanding of the piano. People leaned closer, drawn in by the richness and complexity of the performance. Some children sat on the pavement, imitating the movements of her hands in play, while adults nodded subtly to themselves, acknowledging the skill and dedication behind each note. It was impossible not to be moved, impossible not to feel connected to something greater than themselves. The girl had turned a simple street corner into a stage, a place where humanity came together through the universal language of music. The melody shifted again, this time slower, more reflective. It spoke of moments of solitude, of nights spent alone, of dreams nurtured in quiet desperation. The crowd sensed the vulnerability in her playing. It was as though she was sharing her innermost thoughts with them, trusting strangers to understand her without question. Tears formed in the eyes of some listeners, while others simply stood silently, feeling emotions they had long buried. The music created a bridge between the girl and everyone present, connecting lives that would otherwise never intersect. A man, leaning against a lamppost, could not hide the tears streaming down his face. He had seen much in his life, but the girl's music reached him in a way that nothing else could. He thought of his own regrets, the moments he had taken people for granted, and the assumptions he had made about strangers. In that moment, he felt humbled, reminded of the importance of seeing the humanity in everyone. Around him, others felt the same awakening, a collective acknowledgement that they had been wrong to judge based on appearances alone. The girl continued playing, her hands moving with effortless grace. She alternated between gentle, introspective passages and powerful, soaring melodies. Each transition told a story evoking images and emotions that the audience could feel but not fully describe. It was a performance that transcended skill and technique, reaching into the realm of pure emotion. People were not just hearing music. They were experiencing a part of the girl's soul. The connection was profound, the impact unforgettable. Notes of gratitude began to appear alongside the coins in her cup. Small messages, carefully folded, were left by strangers who wanted to acknowledge her talent. One read, "Thank you for reminding me that there is beauty in the world." Another said, "Your music has touched my heart more than you can know." The girl noticed these gestures, allowing herself a small smile. She did not play for recognition, but these quiet acts of kindness reinforced the belief that her music could truly reach people and create. Understanding, the crowd's respect deepened with each passing minute. People who had once mocked or ignored her now stood with admiration, and the girl had shown them that circumstances do not define a person's worth, that talent and courage can exist in the most